Greetings to all our listeners. I'm William Kay, moderator for this KBBG Meet the Candidates Forum. KBBG wants everyone to vote and is confident that his or her vote will count, but also wants voters to be informed. So remember when you step into the voting booth to cast your vote to always look for special amendments, propositions, and the like. And this year, for the referendum to approve or disapprove a special property tax levy to support the Grout Museum District. Voting is essential to the process of democracy, and in exercising our choice for elective office, you affirm faith in the democratic process. We are pleased to present our KBBG Candidate Forum program, where candidates and interested voters can listen in and ask questions. You're listening to KBBG 88.1 FM Waterloo. Today we have candidates for several different offices. Steve Schmidt, who's a candidate for mayor. Mr. Tavis Hall is a candidate for council at large. And Mr. Pat Morrissey, who's a candidate for Ward 3. We'll start with each candidate to have 2 minutes to introduce themselves and to briefly explain why they're choosing to run for their respective office, and include a brief presentation discussing their qualifications. After the opening statements, candidates will have the ability to question one another, and listeners will be encouraged to call in questions for the candidates by calling KBBG at 235-1515. Candidates will also be able to rebut or challenge statements made by the candidates, limiting their response to 1 minute. So we'll start off with our first question for Mr. Schmidt. In your opinion, what is the most urgent problem facing the city of Waterloo, and what is the first step you would take to solve it if elected?
Well, thank you, William. And first I do want to thank you and the other candidates joining me this morning, and also thanking KBBG for giving us this opportunity. It's too bad that there haven't been more forums like this, so we're very appreciative of having this opportunity. You know, I think there are several issues facing Waterloo, but I think they all ultimately tie back to the fact of economic development. As I've been the at-large city councilman for the last 6 years, I've had the opportunity to get around to all areas of the city, attend virtually every neighborhood association meeting that meets on a regular basis, and I visit with those folks on a monthly basis. And I think there are certain areas of Waterloo where things are going very well. Obviously, our downtown is having a great rebirth with all the money that's being spent down there, state money, federal money, and that's great that we're taking advantage of that. And Waterloo, downtown Waterloo looks great compared to how it looked 10 or 15 years ago. So I compliment the previous mayors and previous councils for their work on that. But there are certainly other areas of Waterloo that are not sharing in that success, and I think ultimately the single biggest factor that would have a positive effect on that would be jobs. And I hesitate to get into too much of a discussion about government providing jobs, because that's not what I'm talking about. But what I am talking about is the private sector and growing jobs in Waterloo. You know, Waterloo used to be a town of 80-some thousand people. Now it's a town of 60-some thousand people. And what we need more than anything else to build ourselves back to that city of 80-some thousand people are jobs. And I think to have jobs in every area of the city, on the north side, east, west, and south, I think is critical. There's a number of empty buildings or partially empty buildings that used to be manufacturing facilities or used to provide other jobs that are either sitting vacant or partially rented. And I think we really need to focus on getting some employers into those facilities. As I visit with the folks at the Greater Cedar Valley Alliance, where their job is bringing employers to Waterloo, the 3 things they say are the determining factors on why employers don't come to Waterloo are our high property tax rates, having the highest property tax in the state, our crime rate, and I think we're certainly working on that, and then our schools. And none of us here is running for school board, and I do believe that our current school board, our superintendent, and our teachers and our parents are turning the corner in regards to our school performance. But so yeah, let's take that off the table for right now. The 2 issues that cause employers not to come to Waterloo are our high property taxes and our high crime rate. And those are 2 things that I have been focusing on for the last 6 years. Those are 2 of the 4 items on my brochure that most of you have probably seen. But if you haven't, give me a call and I'll get one to you. And so that's what I would focus on, is getting jobs to Waterloo.
Good, thank you, Mr. Schmidt. And Mr. Hall, and you can take a little bit more time to just introduce yourself. And the question is, in your opinion, what's the most urgent problem facing the city of Waterloo, and what is the first step you would take to resolve it?
Sure. My name is Tavis Hall. I'm running for Waterloo City Council at large. This is a room that's very comfortable for me. I was here when I was 12 years old. My father, David Goodson, used to have a show here on the station called Make It Plain, and so It's always good to be home. I joked earlier that you can tell sort of who feels home here because I parked in the back parking lot. So that's usually a good sign. You know, when it comes to what are probably our most urgent problems, I think the matter of our TIFs and our incentives and maybe the overusage, it comes back and becomes a burden to taxpayers. When we TIF areas like Crossroads, when we give incentives to areas like Crossroads that are majority hospitality, retail, those are not high-paying jobs, to say the least. The vast majority of those at a hotel are going to be, you know, cleaning rooms, front desk, and those are jobs. They're good jobs for folks who need them. But we should be spending taxpayer dollars, citizens' dollars. If we're going to do it to incentivize businesses, we should make sure that they're good jobs, that they're livable wage jobs. And so it really boils down to a matter of equity. When we TIF and we incentivize Logan Plaza and we offer the same incentive package over at Crossroads, it becomes a very easy decision for folks to make who are looking to come into the city as to where to go. And so if we're going to build on the north end of town, on the east side, we've got to really target our incentives and target our development and target our investments as a city if we're going to see holistic growth.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Mr. Morrissey, if you would also do a brief introduction of yourself and what you're running for, and the question is, what's the most urgent problem facing the city of Waterloo, and what is the first step you would take to resolve it if you're elected?
Well, good morning. My name's Pat Morrissey, and I'm running for City Council Ward 3. My first time attempting anything of this nature. And I thank KBBG for allowing me the opportunity to be here this morning and the invitation. I want people to understand that I have a little bit different bent on what I see as an urgent problem facing the city of Waterloo, not that what Tavis and Mr. Schmidt have referred to as being less by any means, but I believe that one of the problems is that the people in Waterloo have become disconnected from their city government. And I've been walking around knocking on doors, and the people I've been talking with seem to connect with the idea that they want somebody in city government who's going to represent them and they know is going to represent them. And that's what I plan to do when I get elected. Is I have told the people that I've talked with, I've have it in the literature that I've sent out, that what I plan to do is allow people to visit with me, because I will set up meetings 2 times a year in each one of the precincts so that people can see me face to face and they can discuss those issues. Because as an elected official, I represent them. I don't represent just my thoughts, I represent their thoughts. I want to hear from them, and that's what I plan to do by having these meetings. And that way I hope that people will see that they can reconnect with their city government, the most basic form of government there is. Because after all, I firmly believe that people are government. It's not just elected officials who are the government. They're there to represent the ones that put them there to be their voice.
Thank you, Mr. Morrissey. For those of you listening, this is, I am William Kay, moderator for KBBG's Meet the Candidates Forum. Our next question is, what should be done to improve code enforcement, particularly regarding absentee property owners, or how would you handle landlords renting property in the city and not maintaining their property? Mr. Hall.
Well, it's obviously a problem. The neighborhood I grew up in, which was actually in Ward 3, over by Belmont Park, it was a problem then. It continues to be a problem. It's a worsening problem. The city has done a very good job, the best in the state, with the Steve. What's the acquisition, the property acquisition?
657.
There you go.
Yes,
yep.
sir.
We've done a very good job utilizing that program to the city's benefit. what I talked about 2 years ago, and it's still a priority for me. For some context, I did run against our friend Councilman Schmidt 2 years ago. We talked about investing back in neighborhoods, in pre-existing in existing structures, and the ability to incentivize growth and reinvestment back into our neighborhoods. 2 years ago, I did not limit that just to specific new growths, but it was geared towards existing housing structures. And so, working with other members of council, with Mayor Clark, I think that we'll be able to see some very good proposals come forth as to how we can specifically address reinvesting back into existing housing structures, including home modifications and tax abatements for homeowners who do reinvest a certain percentage of that property value.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hall. Mr. Morrissey, and I'll repeat the question. What should be done to improve code enforcement, particularly regarding absentee property owners? Or another way of saying that is, how would you handle landlords renting property in the city and not maintaining the property?
Well, first and foremost, code enforcement is an issue not just regarding property owners, as this question talks about, but code enforcement needs to be fully staffed, and they need to be staffed by people who are well-trained. And I know the volunteers have the best at heart, but when it comes down to actually doing that job and doing it professionally, which we want to have done, I believe that workforce needs to be fully staffed, and it should be properly trained. The second part about this, property owners living in the area of town, which is Church Row, and it's basically the southern portion of Ward 3, I see many of the properties that have been these stately old, nice single-family homes that have been apartmentized into 3, 4, 5 apartments, which are just sort of left to, even while they're inhabited, deteriorate. And I believe that a strong code needs to be applied to property owners, especially those who are absent, out of state, out of town, and if it takes whatever, whether it be fines, whether it be some kind of other measures to bring attention to the need to keep those properties up and looking good rather than deteriorating, I would be in favor of that.
Thank you, Mr. Morrissey. Mr. Schmidt, and I'll repeat the question again for you. What should be done to improve code enforcement, particularly regarding absentee property owners, or how would you handle landlords renting property in the city and not maintaining that property?
Well, I think Patrick maybe was alluding to this about making sure we're fully staffed, but for the last several months, maybe 6 months, we have been understaffed in code enforcement. We're designed to have 4 code enforcement officers in the city. We have been without one of those 4 for several months. He left to take another position. In the meantime, we've taken Maria Tiller, who's a great city employee, but she's the foreman of the code enforcement department, and we've made her our animal control person for the last several months. So, in reality, City of Waterloo basically has been operating with 2 code enforcement officers, and I think that may be part of the problem. There's no way that they can keep an eye on the entire city. I think 4 code enforcement officers probably are not enough because we do have a disproportionate number of absentee landlord situations in Waterloo. One of the challenges I think that Waterloo has is we have some of the lowest priced housing in the country, and there's some good things to that, and there's some not so good things to that, and one of the not so good things to that is, so then it's a haven for out-of-town and out-of-state speculators to buy property thinking that they're going to make a fast buck, and in the meantime, those buildings are just deteriorating. As I mentioned earlier, I get around to all the neighborhood associations, and in some parts of Waterloo, you wouldn't know that we have a code enforcement problem. In other parts, it's very obvious. In the Walnut Neighborhood Association neighborhood, or the what's called Laugh Now, which is over in the Cortland area, Cortland Street area, there are a number of blocks where more than half of the homes are sitting empty, and every day they're deteriorating. They're not owned by any local folks that see that deterioration that's going on, and they're having an extremely negative effect on that neighborhood and ultimately on the city. And so I think, number one, we need to fully staff our code enforcement department. We need to engage our code enforcement officers and tell them code enforcement should be educational once, and that it should be punitive. And so if a landlord or a homeowner doesn't realize they're violating the code, they need to be made aware of that with a warning. And after that, then we need to start inflicting fines. The council has strengthened those fines in the last couple of years and raised them as they become repetitive. But so many of these folks, again, they don't live in the area, it just gets charged their property taxes, and the property taxes never get paid because they end up ultimately walking away from it. So.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Schmidt. And just for our listeners, if you'd like to call in with a question for any of the candidates or all of the candidates, you can call KBBG at 235-1515. And now we go to our third question. What opportunities do you see for cost reduction by sharing services with other local jurisdictions? And we'll start with Mr. Morrissey.
Well, the sharing of services with other local jurisdictions issue, I believe, has come up before. Some places it's worked, other places it hasn't worked. To me, I see sharing aimed at, are we going to share law enforcement? Are we going to share basic services? And quite frankly, I believe that Waterloo, Cedar Falls, and the county are separate entities. I mean, if there's a possibility for it to work, I, as city council person for Ward 3, would be very open to the idea of sitting down and talking about that. But unless there was some kind of definite showing that it benefited the people of Ward 3 and the people of Waterloo overall, then I would not be supportive of that whatsoever.
Thank you. Mr. Hall, the question again is, what opportunities do you see for cost reduction by sharing services with other local jurisdictions?
Well, you know, there was certainly some conversation a few months back about waste management with cities like Cedar Falls. Hudson, I believe, is potentially looking at it. Evansville, I believe, is potentially looking at it. So we do have some opportunities there. I think we also have an opportunity, not just with other local jurisdictions, but with Hawkeye Community College. We have an excellent training center with our fire department. There's an opportunity there. The training center is right across from City View. We've got an excellent opportunity to partner with Hawkeye Community College, and part of a program that we need to pay particular attention to is keeping Waterloo kids becoming Waterloo cops and firefighters. And part of that process is having adequate training here locally. If the city can work with Hawkeye to fully utilize that center, we'll see benefits, not just like I said, with local jurisdictions, but with those consolidations of services and sharing of services, I should say, with Hawkeye Community College as well.
Thank you. You're listening to KBBG 88.1 FM Waterloo. We're in the middle of our candidate forum, and with us is Mr. Steve Schmidt, the candidate for mayor, Mr. Tavis Hall, a candidate for council at large, and Mr. Pat Morrissey, a candidate for Ward 3 council. I got to go on with another question.
Oh,
William, I'm
yeah.
sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, did I forget you?
You forgot me, that's okay.
Mr. Schmidt, please.
Blend in, I know.
And what opportunities do you see for cost reduction by sharing services with local jurisdictions?
Well, one of the things I've talked about at the forums that we have had, I think a real good example of this is one of the folks we interviewed for the Director of Public Safety position a couple years ago came here from Las Vegas. And in Las Vegas, they had combined the police departments with Las Vegas, North Las Vegas, Henderson, one other community in that area, and I believe it's Clark County, and they made a metropolitan police department. And what he told us is that allowed them to have more officers on the street and less administrative staff. Now, I think that area is probably 2 million people, I'm not sure because I'm not real familiar with Las Vegas, but number one, if it would work in a community that large, I would think it certainly would warrant taking a look at in Waterloo, but not necessarily just at the public safety department, but as you look across the spectrum, I mean, Waterloo, Cedar Falls, the county, Evansdale, Hudson, they all have an HR department, they all have a payroll department, they all have any variety of different departments that are all redundant. And I think that some of those departments could very easily be combined into one metropolitan department. The taxpayers, the citizens would have no idea that that was even going on. They wouldn't notice anything changing other than the cost of providing those services would go down. And, you know, the one other thing I would really stress is that being able to do that would obviously lower all our property taxes. We'd all love to have that happen. But again, that goes back to that economic development thing. If our high property taxes are one of the reasons that employers are not interested in coming to Waterloo, they're rather going to Dubuque or Cedar Rapids, who we typically are competing with, you know, that would be one of the benefits of that. Or that would allow us to have more money in our budget for other things. You know, over the last 6 to 8 years, we've had to continue to cut some of the money that we've given to organizations like KBBG. You know, the mayor has discretionary fund that he can contribute certain amounts of money to various organizations. And I think, you know, 20 years ago there were a variety of programs that were subsidized by that, and a lot of those have gone away, and a lot of those were youth-oriented, youth employment opportunities, and those have been some of the things that have been cut because of you know, the tough budget years we've had over the last decade or so.
Good, thank you very much. We'll go on to our next question, and we'll start with Mr. Hall. How would you resolve Waterloo's short-term and long-term budget problems? Be specific. If you support spending cuts, what departments or programs would you cut? If you support revenue increases, what taxes or fees would you increase?
Question 4?
That's question 4. The second part of question 4.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm all over the place here. With the limiting of TIFs, give me 1 second to reread this question, because I got confused. Yeah, if you want to go ahead and reread it.
How would you resolve Waterloo's short-term and long-term budget problems? These are maybe a complicated question,
No.
but be specific if you can. If you support spending cuts, what departments or programs would you cut? And if you support revenue increases, what taxes or fees would you increase?
Gotcha. And it's unfortunate that my opponent isn't here today, because he, you know, the write-up in the Courier on Wednesday talked about his ambition to cut spending, and I would love to hear specifics. We haven't heard that yet. When it comes to my philosophy, again, back to TIFs and incentives, those businesses and those new construction projects that are taking advantage of TIFs still get fire protection, they still get police protection, they still get all the services that the city provides through tax dollars, but they quite often have the abatement, which means that the burden is shifted back onto the taxpayer. So I think with a limited use of those TIF districts, again, we will see more equity when it comes to the tax burden, and it will result in hopefully at least a lesser increase. I think we can all agree that the city on its current trend is tough. It's tough for homeowners, especially our seniors, but we can see greater, smarter use of budget dollars that will result in lower taxes.
Good, thank you. Mr. Morrissey, and I'll repeat the question for you. How would you resolve Waterloo's short-term and long-term budget problems? Be specific if you can. If you support spending cuts, what departments or programs would you cut? And if you support revenue increases, which taxes or fees would you increase?
Okay, first of all, I don't know that there is a short-term or long-term budget problem until I look at it. So the question sort of begs the issue, in my opinion, and I'd want to check that over to see if there even was either of those. If there was, then I'd have to take a look. And I believe that the taxpayers, the people that pay the bills, should be the ones that are consulted. And by having these meetings in each precinct once a month, I'm going to be hearing from the people out there what they see, because that'll be one of the issues that comes up, I'm sure, and I want to hear what they have to say about it. But in no way, shape, or form do I feel that essential services should be cut, nor do I think we should be messing around with our good, qualified, professional city employees in any way, shape, or form. As far as revenue increases, I'm not in favor of raising taxes, but what I am in favor of is quit giving candy away to people like land for $1, or giving away all these tax abatements, thereby lowering the amount of taxes that are collected on properties and raising the taxes basically for the residents of Waterloo. I think that's got to be looked at, it's got to be targeted, and in some cases stopped. I would also be looking at what's been given away so far, and I want to review that, and I want to take a look at that for the taxpayers of Waterloo, because maybe we have been giving away too much to people who have every ability in the world to be paying taxes, but have these abatements given to them. The other thing, if I got a second, is state government has a lot to do with lowering the revenues that we got coming in. One example is what happened last year with the lowering of corporate tax rates. That hurts Waterloo, that hurts Black Hawk County. I'm not in favor of that. If they're going to lower tax rates, they need to lower tax rates for the residents, not corporations. Corporations have full ability to pay their share of taxes and don't need to have their taxes lowered.
Thank you, Mr. Morrissey. Mr. Schmidt, I don't want to forget you this time.
I appreciate that. Well, and I would just mention, both for Patrick's benefit and also some of the other candidates that aren't here unfortunately, but you know, they've kind of mentioned because they haven't been at council meetings or haven't been involved yet that they don't know that for sure. You know, I would just say that 3 of the last 4 years, Waterloo's had the highest property tax rates in the state. The 4th year where we had a 0 tax increase, we did that, or the council and mayor did that because I voted against it. They did that by instituting a $2 million utility fee, which would convert to a 6% property tax increase, which would be double anything we've done in the last 3 years. But my point there being, when we are consistently the highest property tax city in the state, that would tell me that we have some budget issues. We also, over the last 4 years, every year at our budget preparation have used money from our cash reserves to balance our budget, which again is not a smart way of doing business. And if we deplete our reserves, that is going to result in our bonding rate going up, which then is going to cost us even more money. So I do think, you know, we do have budget issues in government in general, but specifically in Waterloo. And you know, one of the things I would do is I would involve our local business community and also our local union representatives to sit down and take a look at, okay, we need to make some changes on how we provide our services to our citizens, and how can we do it in a more efficient manner. You know, I come from the private sector. I've been in the private sector for the last 30 years, and over the last 10 years especially, we have been every year challenged with doing more with less. We've had less employees to provide more services, we've had less employees to provide more profit, and the private sector, by and large, has been able to do that through the use of technology, through the use of collaboration, through the use of working smarter. And you know, I think that can be done certainly at the City of Waterloo, and it can be done by working with the county, with the schools, with Hawkeye, as I believe Tavis mentioned. You know, those are all great ideas. Over the last 6 years, I've had a number of both currently employed and retired business people, business owners, CPAs, managers, but also current and former city employees that have said, you know, I've got an idea that I think we could provide this service, or we could run this department in a more efficient manner. And one of the things I would do is I'd be having those conversations. I'm all about having open meetings. I think that's one of the things you saw with this whole dangerous dog ordinance, that once the discussion turned to having open meetings on that, the committee was dissolved, and now we're kind of back to having city staff come up with the recommendations, which I don't agree with, and I see that's going to be one of our questions a little further down. But I think, you know, you get everybody in the room that has some skin in the game, that has an interest, and number one, we need to ask the question, do we believe that we have an issue here? If we do, then what are we gonna do about it? If we have people that say, no, we don't, our property taxes are fine, let's just let them continue to escalate, then I don't think we're ever gonna get anything changed.
Is there time to?
You can have a minute to rebut if you like.
Well, Steve, one of the things that, it depends upon where you get your information, and some of the information that I've received is that Waterloo is not the highest tax
Can I ask where
property.
you got that information from?
Well, I've heard that in the people that I've been, when I've been knocking doors from people.
Okay.
That's what they're telling me, that they've not heard that.
Okay.
They say Waterloo's standing somewhere in the vicinity of 6th or 7th, that it's gotten better over time. The other thing is that we talk about taxes as though it's the only issue for the people of Waterloo. It's not the only issue. The issue for the people of Waterloo is, are they involved? Do they have a say in their government, or are they just given, by electing people, are they just giving those people the wherewithal to do whatever in city government that they want to do? The workers make up the voting people out there primarily. The workers need to have a say. The working class people of Waterloo have not had that say on city council. The city of Waterloo employs some of the best people that there are. Public employees are great people. They are held to an accountability standard unlike anybody in the private sector. And the problem that has happened and having been an employee, a public employee for over 35 years, I know that, and having been a union steward for over 20 years, I know that, Mr. Schmidt. Don't roll your eyes at me, because I know that that's the way it is. Public employees are great people, and they need to be looked at, and when we are bringing businesses to Waterloo, those businesses need to be providing livable wage jobs. No more of bringing in these businesses that don't provide, all they do is give us low wage, no benefit jobs, and no more giving them candy anymore. They need to, first and foremost, be providing good jobs. And I'm quite frankly sort of startled that Waterloo, back in the 70s and 80s, was one of the manufacturing capitals in the Midwest. Where has manufacturing incentives been to come here to Waterloo to provide good paying, good unionized jobs? Collective bargaining is one of those issues. I know we got a question coming up here, but I just felt I needed to jump in there and say that.
Okay, a brief response?
Well, yeah, I get my information from the state, and the state says 3 of the last 4 years, Waterloo's the highest. You heard people at doors you knocked on question that. I guess I would say my information is probably more valid. And Patrick, I never, ever demeaned city employees, and I get real tired of when we question the cost of providing services in Waterloo, that it immediately becomes defensive on the city employees. I have never demeaned city of Waterloo employees, and the current mayor tries to make that case also. I've never done that. What I have said is, we've just got to figure out a way to provide these services at a more cost-effective rate. You may or may not know that the Social Security recipients in 3 of the last 4 years, I believe, have had a 0 rate increase in their income. And those are the folks that are paying the property taxes more than anybody, because we've got a senior citizen number in Waterloo. And during that same period of time, city employees have had a roughly 10% increase in pay. Now, all I'm talking about is equity. I'm not talking about getting into a angry conversation, but all I'm talking about is equity. And I think if the private sector is the ones that ultimately are paying the taxes, then there should be this meeting of the minds and saying, okay, well, if you guys are getting 0, we're getting 10%, how about we meet in the middle at 5? But so far what we've told is, no, we're not gonna negotiate, we're not gonna talk about it.
Thank you, Mr. Schmidt. We're going to take a brief break, but I just want to remind our listeners that they can call in to KBBG by calling 235-1515. We'll be right back with the forum after this.